Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, this is obviously posed in the context of the French authorities invoking Article 42(7 and the requirement to aid and assist in the event of an attack on another member, and the speculation in the media that you were considering allowing French troops presently located in Mali to be relieved of their duties and go elsewhere, and for their spaces to be filled by extra numbers of Irish Defence Forces personnel. I think that would be a not worthy decision to make, but I'm wondering where you are at it and what's your thinking on it.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Well, first of all, can I just say for the record of the House what Article 42(7 actually is? It's not a mutual defence clause. That's the first thing. It's a mutual assistance clause, and there's a big difference. Right? What it says is that if a member state is a victim of armed aggression on its territory, and other member states shall have towards it an obligation of aid and assistance by all means in their power in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, this shall not prejudice the specific character of the security and defence policy of a certain member state, In other words, for a country like Ireland, we have an obligation to look at how we can be of assistance, but we don't have an obligation to do anything that in any way undermines or contradicts our own policy on defence, which is one of neutrality. Okay, so this idea that we're somehow compromising neutrality is just not true, and we're not being asked to do it either by France or anybody else. What I have said we would try to do is, in response to extraordinary and tragic attacks on the streets of Paris, is that Ireland would do what it could within the confines of what we can do, consistent with our own policy and our own laws and constitution. We would do what we could to help. And the context in which we spoke about Mali was that if France make a decision, which they may do, because they are spread across multiple peacekeeping missions right across North Africa, from the Central African Republic to Mali, to Somalia, into the Middle East and so on. If they make a decision that they need to redeploy some of those troops to focus on national security issues, which is their decision, well, then the UN will have problems, of course, in terms of those peacekeeping missions that may now have reduced personnel. And it's in that context that Ireland may well speak to the UN and talk to them about how we could offer some expertise. We have a lot of expertise and a lot of credibility in peacekeeping.
Thank you,
We're very good at it. And so people should not try to link Irish neutrality and somehow assistance to France as if Ireland is somehow involved in some kind of offensive operation. What we're doing here is, if France feels the need to reallocate resources towards national security, which is very reasonable in the context of what has just happened in France, well, then Ireland obviously will look at trying to be of assistance from a UN perspective and from a good neighbour perspective, if you like, to France.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
To potentially pick up some of that burden. And that is all we're looking at.
And we'll take our time and make our
decision accordingly.
Deputy Clare Daly.
There is, of course, a link, despite the Minister's best wishes. You are correct, of course, that the article involved does state, and very clearly state, that whatever action is taken shall not prejudice the specific character of the security and defence policy of the individual member state. But the problem is that this government and the previous one has had an incredibly fluid interpretation of what it means to be a neutral country. And you see, while France is spread across many multiple peacekeeping operations, it is also the case that the French President has announced that it is going to engage in a pitiless war against ISIS. It is engaged presently in a bombing campaign in Syria and so on. And the idea that Irish troops would relieve French troops in order for them to engage in actions elsewhere within that context would be reprehensible. And you see, we can try and divorce our foreign policy from security issues. You tried to do it in the first question as well. But the reality is that the best defence for our security here is that we stop using Shannon Airport on a repeated basis by the US military, because it is an undoubted fact that the risk threat to Ireland increases as a result of our assisting that aggressive war that's engaged and that is so countlessly productive?
Thank
What
you, Deputy.
counterproductive?
Must call the Minister now to reply.
Deputy, with respect, I think France are better placed to make decisions on how they protect their own citizens than you are for them, which is what you seem to be proposing to do. This is a country that saw over 130 of its citizens mowed down in the streets or blown up in the streets of Paris. One of them, an Irish citizen who luckily wasn't killed but was significantly injured. France has a right to respond, to protect itself, and it will do that. And what it chooses to do isn't going to be influenced by Ireland one way or the other. But if it is redeploying troops in order to protect its own citizens at home and abroad, and if that creates gaps in peacekeeping missions in different parts of the world that Ireland could potentially be helpful to the UN in filling, well then of course we'll look at that, because that's what Ireland does. We do peacekeeping and we do it well, to try and bring stability, to try and protect people, to try and train people, to try and bring some sense of normalisation to conflict zones.
Thank you, Minister.
And we will continue to do that. And that is all that is at play here. And we will come back to this House if we make a decision to do that, which we may not do.
Thank you.
But if we do, and we will go through the normal procedure and justify everything we do in the context of settled policy in Ireland around neutrality.
Thank you, Deputy Clare Daly.
It will be strenuously resisted inside this chamber, I can assure you, because your stance has exposed the utter hypocrisy of the Western authorities in relation to this. France is better placed. France has a right to defend its citizens. The exact contradictory remarks that were made when Russia engaged in the same reprehensible actions by bombing Syria in response to attacks on Russia. The West said, no, you shouldn't be doing that, you're endangering your own citizens, which was correct for Russia, but is also correct for France. And sadly, the French citizens, completely innocent people, slaughtered down, are the victims of their own government's foreign policy, sadly. And the best aid we can give to France, who are very closely aligned to Ireland and who Irish people have very close ties with, would be to advise them to not play into the hands of ISIS, to get their government to stop funding Saudi Arabia, who funds ISIS, and to get them to stop engaging in actions which will give rise to ISIS. And on the subject of Mali, Mali is a former French colony. A lot of the intervention and the role of the French authorities in that region stems from their desire to keep control over the uranium, the gas, the oil supplies in that region, where that's really what's at risk there. And the idea that we will be involved in some post-colonial effort, I think, is reprehensible,
Minister,
to be honest.
to conclude.
Well, Deputy, what I think is reprehensible is that you seem to be suggesting that the tragedies of Paris is the fault of the French government, as opposed to madmen who are fundamentalists, who want to destroy the very way of life that cities like Paris represents, which is multicultural, multi-ethnic, multicolourful. You'll see no city in the world that will have more mixed marriages than Paris. It's a place that I had the privilege to live in as a student for a period of time. And the suggestion that we should be looking at ourselves to blame for what happened on the streets of Paris, that's what's reprehensible in this House. France has an obligation to defend itself. We all have an obligation to work together in the European Union to protect our own citizens. In Ireland, in France and everywhere else. We will take decisions in that context in a way that is consistent with our own laws and with Irish neutrality, which is settled foreign policy here in Ireland, which I support. But I certainly am not going to start lecturing to other countries in terms of how they should be protecting their own citizens in the context of what's just happened.
Deputy Sean Ferry, let the next